Vladimir Putin is also much older and much weaker physically, mentally. The regime is much weaker. The best people, one of the best people left. Whoever survives already thinking about how to survive after Putin, right? So I think the balance of power has shifted quite dramatically in favor of Donald Trump in that relationship.
Crucially, Donald Trump has clocked the weakness of the Russian economy. He was speaking about this last week when he was saying, look, Putin's war effort is destroying the Russian economy. He needs to end the war to aid his economy. And so much of what the Kremlin is trying to achieve with its kind of external propaganda efforts is to frame this narrative that somehow Russia is going into negotiations from a position of strength. But if Trump is there going, well, hang on, you're not that strong because your economy is on the verge of crumbling, that spells bad news for Putin.
Absolutely. And rather bizarrely, I would say, President Trump's sort of showmanship and also his demands of various foreign territories like Greenland or Panama Canal are also playing, also spooking the Kremlin as well. If he's playing like this to his allies and he's treating his allies in this way, what imagine he would be treating people who are not his allies. So I think that they're quite spooky that if he's willing to shout 25% tariffs one day on any random country, and visa restrictions and everything for a particular reason, and for a really tiny kind of misdemeanor, what would be able he to threaten with if we're talking about something serious. So I think they're quite spooked as well on that front, which is not, I'm not condoning or supporting that type of diplomacy, but this is what effect it has at the moment.
How do you view, Vlad, the relationship between Trump and Putin? I mean, it is very complicated. Historically, it's been written up that somehow Trump was a lapdog of Putin. I think that's pretty accurate, to be honest. But clearly, he has been maybe the preferred candidate of the Kremlin in comparison to Biden and Harris. Mark Galeotti had an interesting piece in the Sunday Times over the weekend in which he explored this. And he also pointed out the fact that, there is meant to be this face-to-face meeting soon at some point between Putin and Trump. And that actually is very risky for Putin because if he inflames Trump in any way, it could spectacularly backfire. How do you read their relationship at the moment?
I think Trump 2.0 is different from Trump 1.0. He's now, first of all, in his final term. He definitely knows that whatever he says, he's a very Teflon, he's a super Teflon character. Whatever he says is not going to be held against him because everybody, the expectations are very low. And therefore, I think whatever compromising materials, whatever kind of dodgy financial or any other kind of shenanigans that Donald Trump might have had with Russians or with Russian billionaires or with Russian state earlier, maybe in the 1990s or the early 2000s, who knows? I would say Donald Trump might think this is nothing now. Whatever you can throw at me, I will say it's a lie, fake news, and people will forget about it in 24-hour cycle. So I think whatever strengths that the Russian potentially, let's speculate, they had some sort of compromising material on him. I think that's now absolutely worthless, and I think he understands that. Whereas the weaknesses of the Russian economy and the military machine are quite obvious to everyone to see. And hence, I think the balance of power has shifted in this relationship quite dramatically. Not to mention that, Vladimir Putin is also much older and much weaker physically, mentally. The regime is much weaker. The best people, one of the best people left. Whoever survives already thinking about how to survive after Putin, right? So I think the balance of power has shifted quite dramatically in favor of Donald Trump in that relationship.
Do you think also we're starting to see the signs, according to reports at least, that Putin is losing some of his kind of grasp on the situation? Mark Galeotti also talks about how in briefings now, Putin doesn't listen to the same extent that he used to. He doesn't absorb the information that's being presented to him by his advisors in the way he once did. Now, whether that's complacency, whether that is age, whether that is just the signs of someone who has been in power for too long and doesn't think he needs to listen. Do you think we're seeing those signs of Putin almost losing his touch?
I think that was evident early on in the war. I think in 2022, maybe half first 6 months of the war, somewhere there, the Russian military correspondents and various bloggers went to the Kremlin, and there was a big meet. It was televised, or at least some part of it was televised, and all these people who were, rooting for the war and trying to help, Russia to occupy Ukraine faster, came in with a long list of demands and complaints. And they thought that the Tsar is going to listen. It's just the boyars, right? Is that the entourage, the milieu are not willing to tell him the truth. And now he will listen to the truth and he will do something about it with the generals and the admirals. And I think you could see their faces been absolutely astonished when actually it was Putin to tell him how the war is going and how well people are advancing and how great equipment is there and how brilliant the Russian tactical medicine is working, that 90% of them actually survive any attack. And you can see the faces of these military bloggers who are effectively changing to disbelief, that they thought he doesn't know and they're going to tell him the truth and things will change for the better, whereas actually he didn't want to listen and he just told him another story, another fairy tale. And that has, I think that was already early on. You could see that he doesn't really want to know the real story. He wants to tell people a good story.
Trump's team obviously have not met their original targets to resolve the conflict in 24 hours, but they're now talking about this 100 days to try and do it in the first 100 days of the Trump term. Is that realistic?
I don't think it's realistic. If you, I mean, it's targets and deadline. Having deadlines is good to some extent, and yet at the same time, then Putin will understand. They've got 100 days. I'm going to hold up. I'm going to put a very hard stance on negotiations. Whatever they do, I'm going not to give them anything, an inch. And after that, we'll see what happens. I think it is unrealistic to. I don't know what kind of threat the U.S. administration can actually use against President Putin now. Obviously, there could be a level of threat that is impossible to resist. But if we are looking at a normal sort of type of negotiations, at a normal level of conversation, then I think 100 days is definitely not enough, given that the fact that you would need to have some kind of ceasefire force, some kind of military international observation force to hold to that ceasefire line, and obviously in 100 days nobody can conjure up 50 or 100,000 foreign soldiers to bring into Ukraine. That's obviously impossible.
And looking ahead to what a possible deal may look like and what the terms would be, do you fear it is inevitable, Vlad, that it will involve the ceding of some Ukrainian sovereign territory? Even if Ukraine doesn't officially recognize it as being Russian, there will be a kind of freezing of parts of the front lines that would allow what is currently under Russian control to stay that way in exchange for some kind of security guarantee for Ukraine. That's not the ideal. I know there'll be many people watching who think, well, look, we shouldn't give up any sovereign Ukrainian territory. But realistically, do you think that's where we're heading?
I would say that the best scenario would be to try to hold on to this fighting for another 12 months and see what the internal dynamics in Russia will prove to be. The recent opinion polls that continue to regularly ask people questions: how long can they suffer this war? The latest one still says that 63% Ukrainians respondents say for as long as it takes. 6% say for one more year. So if you combine those two figures, you will have almost 70%, at least definitely two-thirds that are capable of surviving this for as long as it takes, or at least another 12 months. You have a third who are really suffering and say, I cannot take it any longer, or maybe 6 months max. But it just have the majority of people who are fairly resilient to this war. In terms of the opinion polls and in terms of negotiations, the number of people who believe that in order to achieve peace and preserve independence as soon as possible, Ukraine can give up some of its territories. The number of people agreeing to that statement increased to 32%. And yet I need to say that 30% has been stable from May 2024. So almost for the last 6 to 9 months, the number of people who say that this is plausible has not increased. So it kind of stabilized after the Kursk offensive and stabilized now after the Trump rhetorical offensive. People who are saying that we shouldn't be giving up any territory has actually slightly increased to 58%. So as much as we all know lots of people suffering, as much as we all know our friends, relatives, and acquaintances saying this is really horrible and it's we can't really take it anymore. This constant barrages of missile attack, drone attacks, especially Shahid drones, and that really gets people awake, literally awake at night, for many months. Still, you can see, maybe 2/3, definitely more than half of people are capable of holding up for now. And I think I would say that probably is a better way of strategizing for the next 12 months. Using the military equipment and support that was given in the end of the Biden administration, try to get something out of Trump administration. You might continue negotiating, but I don't think that will go far very fast. And so continue to increase, obviously, the number of mobilized soldiers, use the equipment, and continue to hold the line for as long as you can. I think 12 months it's a kind of a good number. And after that 12 months, I think the situation will be radically different, from a kind of 50-50 truce conditions to something much more in Ukrainian and Western favor. Because I think, I keep reminding people, the German army was not far away from Paris in 1918. Right, it wasn't the French troops that were marching to Berlin, and yet the First World War finished the way it finished. So I think this war has a much more First World War ending scenario for me, in kind of thinking, than any other type of war.
It's a really good point. Vlad, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, James, and all good luck.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.